You use a really interesting phrase toward the beginning of the book, where after discussing some of this evidence that change seems to be accelerating, you say we're somewhere between the tipping point and the point of no return.
Yeah.
So I don't know where that puts us, but I'd like to know.
Well, it's an interesting concept, this tipping point and point of no return concept, because it helps clarify the way Earth's climate system works. And what we've learned is that there is a particular concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere which have the potential to tip Earth's climate system into a new stable state. And most likely that will be an ice-free Earth. Yes, and we go back to the conditions in many millions of years ago. And we think now, although there is still uncertainty around this, Jay, but we think now that that tipping point is reached when the concentration of carbon dioxide reaches about 350 parts per million in our atmosphere. Now, we passed that point sometime in the mid to late 1990s. You know, we're now way above that, the 1990s anyway. But because the extra heat that carbon dioxide traps has to be absorbed by the ocean and travel through the system in a pervasive manner before we reach a point of no return, in other words, before we're totally committed to this ice-free Earth state, there is a lag of probably, again, this is a rough assessment, between 40 and 60, 70 years before we reach that point of no return. So we know we crossed the threshold, the tipping point in the 1990s perhaps, maybe late 1980s, somewhere there. And we know that at some time before 2050 we will have committed ourselves to an ice-free Earth. So that gives us the time frame within which we must act to reduce CO2 levels back below 350 parts per million.
Right, so it's no longer an issue of slowing our emissions or even halting, well, maybe halting them, but we actually have to reduce what's there.
That's right. I mean, the average residence time of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is about 100 years, and we need to somehow accelerate the drawdown of the CO2, so we need to not only reduce our emissions, but actually get some of the gas out of the air. And that in the book I devote a couple of sections to that problem, and the solutions there are much easier than you might think.
I want to talk about solutions, but just to sort of give this some context, there are experts, maybe not very many, but James Lovelock among them, the creator, the inventor of the Gaia hypothesis, who thinks we're already way past being able to do anything, and foresees a halving of the global population and a miserable existence going forward. So is he just an outlier?
James Lovelock is a very interesting person. I've met him, spoken with him, and looked at his work very carefully. And James Lovelock's genius is in empathy. His major scientific breakthroughs are breakthroughs which have been mediated through his extraordinary sense of empathy. And just to give you an idea of how he works, he was an air hygienist during the Second World War, looking at air quality in the bomb, shelters and so forth. And it was James Lovelock who understood how the transmission of the common cold occurs. And he realised it couldn't occur through the air, it had to occur through physical contact. How did he come to that conclusion? He imagined himself as a virus in the atmosphere and imagined an antiseptic spray being sprayed at him, a particulate spray, and saw in his mind's eye that the chances of a collision between him as the virus and a droplet of antiviral material was next to nothing. It couldn't happen, and yet these antiviral sprays were working because they were falling on surfaces, having an impact on the viruses. So anyway, he works through empathy, and James Lovelock is 90 years old, and when he looks at Gaia, the Earth system, it's my personal view that his feeling of empathy is transferred onto the Earth. He's constantly referring to the Earth as an old lady, a frail old lady, whose stability, physiological stability, is dependent upon certain constancy of condition. So I think that his great asset as a researcher. In some ways has become a liability when it comes to the climate issue. I think he takes too pessimistic a view because of that sensibility. I'm sorry for a long answer there, but
it's fascinating. Producing energy is one of the main sections of the book, and of course this is a huge issue because many of the means that we use to produce energy, particularly burning coal, are anathema to a lowered carbon dioxide world. What do you think we can do with coal, or about coal?
Well, you've hit upon the central question, I think, in terms of the energy mix for humanity's future. And the reason I say that is that the build-up of coal-fired capacity in China is now so large, and it's all such recent plant, that we have no choice but to develop carbon capture and storage and retrofit that plant. And to put that in figures, in China over the last decade, 500,000 megawatts of coal-fired capacity, electrical generation capacity has been installed. The Chinese will never decommission that stuff until it's run its full lifespan, which is another 50 years. The implications of that are that it's almost impossible to solve the problem without carbon capture and storage. So we need to invest significantly in carbon capture and storage. Could I just say, Jay, that there is carbon capture and storage and carbon capture and storage. You know, there's oils and oils. Right? The Canadian government today introduced announced a program where they were going to be investing about $340 million in a carbon capture and storage venture in Alberta. And this revolved around a new coal-fired plant that is going to be built in Alberta, 450 megawatt plant, so quite a large plant. And if I've read the figures correctly, this $340 million investment will only capture between 10 and 20% of the emissions of that plant. And a proportion of those emissions captured will be used to increase wellhead pressures in oil wells, so to get more oil out of the ground. And we don't know what the longevity of the carbon is going to even be in those oil wells. You know, so the total carbon accounting of that project looks pretty terrible to me. It's not the sort of investment we need to solve the problem. First, because it's a brand new coal-fired power plant, and we should never be building another one of them without total carbon capture and storage. Secondly, because it doesn't address the issue of retrofitting the existing plant, which is the critical issue from a global perspective. And thirdly, because the carbon balance is crap in that, it looks to me. And that's my initial assessment of it. So when I say we've got to invest in carbon capture and storage, we've got to invest in real carbon capture and storage. You know, this is retrofitting plants using things like oxy-fuel technology and pre-combustion technology and so forth in places like China, where they're really needed.